Welcome to Ad Studio 30 Live. I'm John Dioso, editor of Studio 30. It's not news that women make up more than half of the total population, but what may be surprising is that almost a quarter of the way through the 21st century, there's still often a gap in both understanding of and attention to vital women's health issues. The good news is awareness of this disparity is finally rising, thanks in part to brands and marketers that focus on female health. To help us give women's health the attention it deserves, I am honored to be joined by Julie Hurwitz Aliaga, Executive VP of Innovation Content and Partnerships at CMI Media Group, Wendy Lund, Chief Client Officer, WPP Health and Wellness, and Samantha Ski, CEO of She Media. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey there. Thanks for
Sorry
having
for
me.
that silent countdown to push the audience out there. I was like, am I live? Yes, I am live. And audience members, if you guys are live and joining us, please let us know where you're tuning in from. We'll give you a shout out later. All right, let's get into the discussion. This is an enormously important discussion, especially today, which is International Women's Day. First of all, let's just level set. What is the current state of women's healthcare in terms of awareness, as well as the attention paid to it by both the health industry and the public at large? Julie, can you give us some insights from CMI Media's new Media Vitals research? And then maybe Wendy, you can weigh in with what WPP found in your Health on Her Terms study. Go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you teed it up perfectly. Women make up more than 50% of the US population, 51% to be exact. Yet we are still at a place where we're seen as an afterthought when it comes to healthcare, unfortunately, and the unique needs of a woman compared to men. We are grossly underserved in many communities and populations throughout our country and throughout the world. And when we do address these concerns, oftentimes we're faced with this stop overreacting type of tone, which is unsettling. There's a lot of illness that is still also seen as a man's disease. And to your point, through our Media Vitals research, we're able to pull through insights and data and break down at the audience level to uncover the unmet needs of women. So you take cardiovascular disease, for example, women have heart attacks too. So let's keep putting a lens on that. And when we look at something as simple as going to a doctor's appointment and talking openly with employers about that, women are still feeling that stigma surrounding breast exams. I myself am at a high risk for breast cancer. I go every 6 months, and I am fortunate to work for an employer who understands the health needs of women, but that is something that I'm very fortunate about, and not everybody has that opportunity. So we really do need to reduce the stigma, increase employer support everywhere, and for everyone. And then you marry that with a need for more awareness as it relates to gynecological education, everything from postpartum depression to menopause. And we have a really great opportunity here to push harder for basic needs and broad awareness and do better for each other and all of the generations of strong women to come. Wendy, I know you have a lot to say on this topic too.
I do. So first of all, just going back, today is International Women's Day. And what's interesting about International Women's Day is that today is all about gender equity. And one of the big conversations we need to have is about health and gender equity, because they're inextricably linked. And as Julie said, 51% of women make up the population, yet our health needs are severely underserved. So it's time for change. I'm starting to see it. I'm excited about what we can do. In terms of WPP and the study that you referenced, John, Health on Her Terms, one of the big issues around stigmatization and taboos is that a lot of this is seen in pop culture, in the media. We've had a lot of advances for women in pop culture and media in general, but in health, we're still way, way behind. So we did a study called Health on Her Terms, and we had 3 big takeaways. And I'm going to do them quickly because I know we don't have a lot of time. The first is that usually when you see women in a health ad or, portraying her health in some way, she's pretty much the same woman, white, 35 or so, 2 kids. We really need to dimensionalize who this woman is. There's so much intersectionality around her sexuality, around her gender, around her ethnic background, where she lives, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we really need to take that into account when we're talking about women. The second is the whole idea around exceptionalism. Most of the time when we see women in health, we're seeing her as an exceptional being, someone like Simone Biles, Serena Williams. We all idolize these women. They're inspirational to us. But every woman, like the 3 of us on this phone, has a special story to tell about her health. And those stories will help give voice to other women to tell their stories and remove a lot of the stigma and taboo. And then finally, you know, one of the things I've been talking about for years is women and how they take care of themselves. Women are nurturers by nature. They are ready to take care of everybody, their kids, their families, their jobs, their parents, and of course their friends, and of course even the dog. And then they get there on the list somewhere as number 7. We know she's never going to be number 1 on the list. We need to get her to number 2 at least. And when you look at her in advertisements, a lot of times you'll see her like having a migraine and like the kids are running around, get better for your kids. No, she needs to get better for herself. So we have a lot of work to do, but I do feel like that everything's kind of pointing in the right direction, and we just need to keep moving and progress the conversation and our actions.
All right. First of all, Wendy, great job summarizing that incredibly massive study that you did, because there's a lot of data in there. Hopefully you can weigh in with some other data points throughout the conversation, because I do recommend people download it, because there is a lot of great information there, especially for our audience.
Go to WPP.com and you'll go to the Health on Her Terms page and you can find everything there. There's a big report there.
Excellent. And Samantha, you know, on the one hand, there's the massive challenge of dealing with the historical inequities and how the healthcare industry has ignored women's health. On the other hand, there's the almost mirror image of how media and advertising have historically depicted those same issues, right? So what have you seen as the major challenges to addressing women's health from your perspective at She Media?
Well, at She Media, we publish mostly for women and primarily by women. So I think we endeavor to be very sensitive to the tone, the representation, the mix of, we say, science and stories. That said, I've been in media for 30 years, and advertising is really good at perpetuating gender stereotypes and in general in perpetuating sexism, racism, homophobia, Zionism, I mean, everything. So because you're sort of marketing to the least common denominator, which is often a person who is not terribly interested in seeing our realities and in seeing the future we would like to have. So with that, we often look at advertising imagery, at the imagery we're using on our websites, and we contemplate, like, how are we presenting something like migraine health? How are we discussing depression? Are we attaching depression to something that is uniquely female? Potentially. Hormonal shifts are both underreported, or the impact of hormonal health is both underreported and in many cases used to dismiss women and reduce their credibility in the workplace and in emotional forums. So it's a tricky line between how do we be useful, transparent, allow for both the science and the stories, without kind of, while including everybody. One thing I would point out is that the research on women's health is horrendous. You mentioned this earlier. The majority, about 57% of research on women's brains is actually an analog. Usually it's using men's brains as the case study, or I should say 57% of diagnosis is using a man's brain as the basis. And that analog doesn't work. There are all sorts of differences at a cellular level, obviously hormonal, but we have, 2 times the rate of Alzheimer's with women, often intersecting with hormonal shifts, dementia, foggy brain. So teasing that apart has been really difficult because research has been conducted on white heteronormative men and then applied over to women. Women finally are gaslit most often, are most likely to be left waiting longer in hospital waiting rooms, are likely to be misdiagnosed. Over half of women believe that they've been misdiagnosed at some time and discounted specifically because of their gender. So with all of that in mind, we're trying to ensure that women's health is taken seriously, but also that it's normalized. It's not bad to say perimenopause. People should know what that means and not just think of it as hot flashes or some other kind of reductive euphemism. So, but we also don't want to be so aggressive in a sense or so true to the language that we scare people, which is unfortunate. What I can talk to my friends about and what I can talk to my 88 million readers about is not the same.
Right. I mean, I think we are establishing, almost halfway through the conversation, what a massive issue this is, and there's a lot of lost ground to make up for. So how can the media, advertising, and marketing industries begin to turn this all around and affect real change and counteract, what is obviously decades of neglect?
Yeah.
Please weigh in. Julie, if you
Yeah.
want to take it, and everybody else could weigh in.
Yeah, so I think Samantha hit it right. I mean, we have such an opportunity here to really dig into the research that we have right now surrounding women. I mean, there's so much more research, to her point, that needs to be done that is focused solely on women. But as an advertising community, we have a great opportunity here to make a huge impact on this issue through strong communication, strong research, insight-driven opportunities, especially as it relates to targeting, right? So when we talk about women, I think Wendy hit this too. We're all not the same, right? There are so many different subsets of women. So even when we get down to targeting women, we need to break it down even more granular than we have been, right? So we take that research, we break it down to where the woman needs to be met, and we meet her there with awareness, with education, and with access. And then from a creative perspective too, make sure that she is seeing herself in the creative that is being targeted to that person, to that whole woman. So that's where I think as an advertising industry, we can push harder and make a really positive change across the board.
Wendy, do you want to weigh in? There's so much data in the Health on Her Terms report, I think, that applies to this, especially you started to talk about gender identity is one of them, but there are so many other different granular ideas and data in there that people could drill in on.
Happy to. Also, we'll boil it down quickly, but we all know, just to go back to Julie's point, we all know that women are healthier when they have more autonomy over their health. And in our society and around the world, women have just had to be very inventive when it takes their own health needs into their own hands, with an industry that really doesn't take women's health needs seriously, from self-care and beyond. And this is a huge opportunity now for marketers to deliver on these needs, especially for underserved women and low-income women and underrepresented communities that have really been marginalized by the health community. We also know that, if you look at the research, and we were just talking about this as well, women were actually banned from clinical research until the 1990s in the US. I mean, it's just unbelievable. We also know that media, when we interviewed the women that we talked to, that media shies away from women's health. 50% of the people we interviewed said media shies away from women's health. That is a huge proportion of people. And when we dug down deeper, we found that there were 3 critical areas of women's health that are least likely to be on her terms. And I don't think a lot of the people listening or seeing this are going to be surprised by this. One is around weight diversity. We're hearing a lot about this right now in the area of obesity and, all these different discussions around that. Reproductive care, a whole area we won't get into right now, but obviously the politics swirling around this, and all the things happening in our medicine cabinet. And then mental health, which is a huge issue, and women tend to think that depictions of mental health are unhealthy. So it goes on, but what we decided to do was to take all this data and take a step back and say, what can we do to be better as marketers? And we created what we're calling the Hippocratic Oath for marketers, which is do no harm. And we're hoping that all marketers will join us in this quest to really change the way we do things, whether it's representing her as a self-empowered intersectional person who has different motivations and different needs and experiences. I mean, if you just look at some of the ads that you see, how could that be visualized differently? Empowering her as a role model and championing health and wellness without her needing to be exceptional, and that all women, deserve a platform and spotlight. And I will encourage any woman who is willing to talk about her health issues, like Julie did today, like I have done in the past. It really does help other women talk about their own health issues and ask the right questions of their healthcare provider. And then finally, depicting her as a whole self, not just a human caring for others, and humanizing her narrative. And if, all marketers can kind of join hands with media and do this, we can make a huge difference. So again, do no harm, Hippocratic Oath for marketers, like, let's do this.
Have you signed on to the Hippocratic Oath, Samantha?
I would sign on to any kind of oath that would bring the world forward on the issue of women's health. One more thing that's interesting to our industry is that certain words that are considered unsafe, where we as advertisers are defunding women's health content. And I've had many conversations in a room where it's like, hey, editorial team, uterus is a dirty word suddenly. based on the
I
way
think you cut out for a second there. I don't know if that was me, Samantha. What's being defunded?
uterus is an unsafe word, as are many other words that connote women's biology for advertisers. That's essentially defunding the content. We say, let's make our great content, which is what we want to do all day. We have to recognize that that content is going to be perceived as less valuable on the open exchange, which is a really surprise. It's a problem that I don't think is discussed often enough. If breast, if vagina, if uterus, if vulva, if ovaries are bad words, and are thus worthless to advertisers, if you put those words on your block list, I'd check yourself, because I don't know what kind of oath you're signing right there, except that we're villainizing a woman's body and considering it, less valuable than entertainment content about, the latest in Kim Kardashian's wardrobe. So that's an insidious little one that I've noted in running, as I run editorial and run monetization. And I think that's really important. I think incredibly brave advertisers like, the WPPs and CMIs and their clients will approach difficult conversations and use the ad medium or use that conduit to normalize conversations about women's bodies, about our biology, women's mental state. That's an investment that we hope is going to drive bottom line, and that also shows some bravery when I see a lot of digital media that is really sort of, again, perniciously and perhaps inadvertently defunding health content that is more expensive to produce.
Right. And I think that's part of what I was talking about before, about it's still shocking that this deep into the 21st century, that there is still that weird reticence or fear of the type of terminology to say, oh, you can't say those. There's certain words you can't say on TV or, in print or wherever. If you're just joining us, this is at Studio 30 Live, and today we're discussing putting women's health front and center. I'm John Dioso from Ad Age, and I'm being joined by Julie Hurwitz-Aliaga from CMI Media Group, Wendy Lund of WP Health and Wellness, and Samantha Ski of She Media. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. So let's get back to the discussion, because we still have a lot I'd love to cover in the remaining time we have left. Despite all that, what I just mentioned about there being the surprise, there is a lot to be optimistic about, especially, when you look at the different studies and the research that you guys have done. The younger generation is a lot more insistent on there being that equity, right? And they're a lot more insistent about advocating for underrepresented groups, diversity, et cetera. So, as media and advertising shine an increasingly brighter spotlight in women's health, these challenges present tremendous opportunities, as we've discussed. But what can be done in an environment where major aspects of women's health, such as reproductive rights, as Wendy brought up before, identity issues related to gender, sexual orientation, and ethnicity, are often treated as political footballs in the culture wars, rather than essential human rights, not to mention in some cases, actual life or death issues. Please, anybody could weigh in on this one.
Well, I'll go first if it's okay.
Sure.
And I actually want to tee up after something Samantha said, because just in terms of the words we use on TV, I was clicking through my TV last week and I landed somehow on an All in the Family. Does anybody remember All in the Family episode?
Yep.
And Archie Bunker was really, really, really upset because his daughter was going on and on and on about the word breast, and she and the husband were going to go out and use this word breast, and he was going crazy. And I just couldn't believe that these same conversations that were happening on All in the Family in the early 1970s are like still happening now, which kind of brings it to the question that you're asking about, which is that, we are in very challenging times when it comes to women's health and what's happening. At the end of the day, I think all people, or many people, believe that government should not be having their hands on women's bodies. It's not their role, that the Supreme Court should not be in our medicine cabinets. But I also think, despite all of the outcry and all of the needs that women have, we really need to team up with bigger industries to help us. A good example would be if the life sciences industry or the healthcare industry comes together and helps forge, an effort around what's right and what's wrong around women and their health. The other thing, and then I'll let someone else go, is that, interestingly, young women, we found in the study, this Health on Her Terms, the youngest of women we interviewed, 18 to 25, don't even know where to seek out health information. They're not going online. That was troubling because, I have a 25-year-old and I thought, oh, well, she's getting all, and I, of course, have been a very, very present mother as it relates to her health. But not everybody feels comfortable doing that or is like that. And if they're not seeking out that information from credible resources, that's another challenge we have is, these women get older and older and older.
What was the figure, Wendy? It was something like 21% only consult an actual health professional.
Yes.
And that's the highest number.
That's
Everything is below that. So even like doing your own research online is very low. So it's almost like society, we've been fostering this sense of almost like self-ignorance as far as figuring out what to do about your own health.
Right. They're not able to really get to those credible resources, and they're also getting a lot of their information off like Reddit and chats and things like that.
Yeah,
so it needs to be in like pure form educational resources where women are getting this information, but they're not even seeking it out.
I've seen this too. I think we often assume that, Gen Z is going to save the day, or some, as a Gen Xer, like we've wrought what we've wrought. Like it's on us to fix it for our girls. And I think that as we've all been saying, normalizing conversation. So it's not weird to talk about perimenopause, like our mothers, where it was like, I don't know if it happened. Did it happen? To actually describe it and not to describe it as something that means a woman is, in her third stage of death and heading off into the sunset, but is actually a very, she might be a very vibrant, wise person who is super sexy and crushing it, at work. So I think that, one of the brands we're launching is called Flow, and it's about whole life health. One of the reasons I think that women's health ends up being political is we only think of reproductive rights, or reproduction. Like that's one little part. There's this wonderful stat that only at any given moment, globally, only 5% of the population is either pregnant or trying to get pregnant. And yet when we contemplate women's health, we think about reproductive health. We don't think about brain health. We don't think about pelvic floor. We don't think about, podiatry. Like there's so many things that are eliminated from our lexicon because we've got the reproductive system, and God forbid it not work. So I think it's women's health is made political because you look at a tiny fraction, which is political, instead of, I don't think my brain health should be terribly political. Anyway, so I think it's the narrowness and the general sort of patriarchal system and, handmaid tale role that cause us to think that women's health could ever be is political. One little,
I want to say, please don't let it be that, please let that be euphemism, but then Handmaid's Tale actually preceded what's happening right now, so it's very hard not to feel that way.
Well, John, and I wanted to just talk about some optimism for a minute too.
Yeah, that's good because that's not coming from me.
I think that was actually the question I asked.
We can go down a rabbit hole right now that I don't want to.
I'm sorry.
No, but it's the truth.
It's a Gen X thing, we're
just dark. We're dark.
I get it.
We're dark.
But I will say there is much to be optimistic about as well. And I don't want anyone watching or even ourselves to lose sight of what that means, right? So I think, and I've talked to a lot of peers, I know, Wendy, you and I have talked about this a lot. What can we do and how can we take this optimism? One word that always bubbles up to the top to me is allyship, right? So allyship, and I'll even add mentorship as I'm listening to Samantha talk. We can do so much with these two words in women's healthcare, in educating peers, in just being vocal. If you don't care about women's health right now, start caring. There's a huge gap in our industry, in our society for this. Become an ally. Start to build. Start to look around. You might see people that don't look like you. That's a good thing. Gather those people, build your allies, build those partners, and start to educate and really work towards something that could be just super groundbreaking here, right? We're already there. I think, Wendy, you mentioned that, but there's still a lot of work to be done, and we have to remain optimistic about it. Find those allies, find people to be your mentors, reach out to them. We're all in it together, and I think we just have to remain optimistic.
Thank you for that. And I think that's a perfect way to end. I just want to ask, I want to wrap up with that sense of optimism. So, you've both done these big research studies. What's next? What can we look forward to in the coming weeks? And, how does anyone who wants to learn more get involved contact you?
Yeah, so there's a lot. This is just the start. So at WPP, at CMI Media Group, we are partnering with She Media Group, She Media, I should say, not just this month, but throughout the entire year, forever, forever, on this topic. So we're going to be releasing more updated studies, more research. We have a brilliant creative campaign coming in May that we're partnering with Samantha and team on. So there's a lot of work to be done. We're just getting started, a lot of change together.
Is that
We
going
can
to
all
be
give away
announced?
free media. Use your platform is one other thing I would say. We will give free media to anyone who's addressing the real issues that we're endeavoring to bring. The ad industry's creative, the ad industry's reach, the ad industry's brains and women and allies. If they get together, we're really good at changing minds and driving behaviors. We just often have to apply it to, we don't get to apply it sometimes to social issues. So it's exciting, that piece. You turn me around, Julie. It's exciting.
I agree. You know, having been saying the same things for the last 25 years, I feel optimistic as well. I feel like people are sensitized. Their minds are open. They want to make change. I believe men are our allies. They want to, when I have mentioned to men in groups with men there, they just stand up. They want to do what's right. It is just so inspiring to me to see how men react and want to be a part of this. And I say, you know, we all just need to join hands with industry, with others, move forward, because I do believe that we will see significant change in our lifetime as people are investing more, that, you know, just the issues have just really gotten much, much more talked about. And I'll say one quick example, which is menopause. Hasn't been talked about in this country since WHI studies, so a little over 15 years ago. And now we're started to see a lot of this in the UK, where all this talk was going on. And I was like, that needs to be transferred over to the US. And now we're starting to see a lot more of that. We need to be talking about that from perimenopause up through, because this is a bright spot in women's lives when they're in this time of their life. We can speak to it, I'm sure. And so we got to keep those kind of movements going.
Well, I think that's a perfect. Oh, go ahead, Samantha. Sorry.
I was just say, just the curiosity and conversation is, I think, what drives industry. And so, I like what I mean. I'm in England right now, but in the U.S. on both sides of the pond, I think we have there's investment going into perimenopause and menopause, and that's great because the conversations there were able to sort of speak up about the needs and the opportunities for better whole life health. And I think that's where I see advertisers and marketers and, you know, pharmaceutical companies really coming forward to say, okay, we can put science against some of these things. If you tell us that you've got a problem, you consumer or patient. So that's one of the reasons to be loud and interested, is that the solutions will follow.
All right. Well, I think that's a perfect place. And thank you so much. There's a sense of it's about time, and a sense of optimism as well. So thank you guys. Thank you, Julie, Wendy, and Samantha. Thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you out there for joining us. For Ad Age Studio 30 Live, I'm John Dioso. See you next time.